Climate Justice Charter movement says that we are in a state where the state and the economy is in crisis. South Africa is completely unprepared, they say, for a climate catastrophe. The movement is calling for political parties, civil society and all other South Africans to take greater action to combat climate change. Dr. Vishwas Satgar joining us now on that conversation. He's an activist with the Climate Justice Charter movement. Dr. Vishwas, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on this afternoon. If you look at the campaign trail so far to 2024, and we look at the big three, maybe if we like, are these parties concerned about the shocks that we are seeing of drought, the shocks of floods, heat waves, and so on and so on that have been taking place, that we are seeing, especially in the southern parts of Africa, that they have prioritized them high on the list in terms of their campaign promises?
No, we're not seeing that. And in 2015, we started living on a new planet and a new region when the world overshot 1 degree Celsius temperature since the Industrial Revolution. And we've been living climate extremes, which is something that the climate science has been warning us about. We lived through the worst drought that the country has had circa 2014 till about 2021. The response from government and the response from the parliament and politicians was dismal, to say the least. They did not rise to the challenge around a climate emergency vis-a-vis the drought. It devastated poor communities in terms of high food prices. It impacted the agricultural system, etc. There has been no learning from that. Over and above that, we've had the rain bomb in Durban. We've had, which led to major loss of life, almost 500 people. We've had storm surges, extreme in the Cape area. We've had wave impacts, and we've had heat waves. Now, this is not frontline in the thinking of our parties. The South African government essentially believes that because it participates in the international COP and that it has a presidential climate commission, therefore this issue is being dealt with. The fact of the matter is they are really, really behind the science, and they're behind the challenge.
Just transition plans, of course, would have been coming into sharp focus, even now coming out of COP28. South Africa took a particular position around this just transition, and if I were to quote what the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy had to say, saying the situation of the handling of the Komati power station has been a disaster. He says how that just transition was kind of rushed. What do you make of the tone that has been taken?
Well, this is very consistent with the outcome from this COP28 and its final sort of position. This COP has been a disaster for humanity, consistent with 28 years of global climate negotiations. The first point to make about it is that instead of committing to the rapid phase out of fossil fuels, it basically framed a position that says we will transition from fossil fuels in our energy systems that will be equitable, fair, and by 2050. Essentially, this is an unambitious position. It is not consistent with climate science of peaking emissions cuts by 45% by 2030. It says nothing about the financing that will come to countries, particularly in the global south, that have fossil fuel resources and that will help them transition. And essentially, it's a victory for fossil fuel corporations. There were over 3,000 lobbyists at this COP summit from this industry. Some of the top executives were there. You also had over 90,000 people going to this COP with a massive carbon footprint. But this is the one side of the issue. The other side of it is that it also provided for gas and other kinds of low-emitting carbon-based fossil fuels to be part of the transition. Now, this gives license to people like Mantashe. The failure to phase out fossil fuels, at the same time allowing for these transitional fossil fuels, allows people like Mantashe to say, keep the decommissioning off the agenda for Komati and other power stations. It allows him and the government to push ahead with their offshore oil and gas extraction. And essentially, this is a major disaster for us as a country. the world is going to overshoot 1.5 degrees Celsius because of this lack of commitment for about 28 years. And this is probably going to happen in the early 2030s, around 2034, according to one climate science study. For us as a country, this is going to be devastating. At 3 degrees Celsius, that's what's going to be the outcome, because we're hitting it twice the global average. Our food systems are going to be challenged. Our livestock is going to be challenged. Our water systems are going to be challenged. And essentially, we are unprepared as a country. So this COP, as well as the national leadership that we have in this country, are taking us into a catastrophe and taking us into a nightmare. They are essentially pushing an unjust transition and a false transition.
How do you see then that particular gap for you as an electoral tactic that could possibly work in 2024?
So this has not been an easy question for us. We produced the world's first climate justice charter bottom up through engaged dialogue during the droughts. We had constituency dialogues throughout 2019 with labor, faith-based communities, social justice organizations, youth, children, academics. And we went through a very deep process of consultation on a draft throughout 2020 before we took it to Parliament. We took this charter to Parliament because our Constitution provides in Section 234 for charters to be adopted. Our Parliament basically ignored us. We also took the cutting-edge climate science to Parliament, and all the parties ignored us. And basically in 2022, we took a fire brigade to the gates of Parliament to get their attention, and again, they ignored us. So for us, it's very, very clear as a movement that there isn't a political will, there isn't serious commitment in the state amongst the parties in the power structure in South Africa. So for us, we believe that the urgencies of climate science, the failure and crisis of leadership, the crisis of our democracy requires us to step up. So we've decided that we will register as a political party to contest the national elections through proportional representation. We want to be able to get a few tried and tested activists, intergenerational activists, into Parliament so we can resist more oil, coal and gas, which we don't need as a country, so we can raise the awareness of the urgencies of the climate crisis. We can galvanize collective action. We want a national convention in this country for a climate justice deal. We want to put South Africa on a climate emergency footing. And in addition, we want to give content to the deep, just transition. There are policies that can solve a myriad of problems that we are facing, this poly crisis. There's climate jobs that can give jobs to millions of young people that are unemployed in this country. Simple things like a firefighting service. We don't have a national firefighting service. Managing biodiversity in our communities and keeping ecosystems robust. We can create millions of climate jobs, small-scale agroecological food systems. This can create massive amounts of employment. Of course, we also need to transition our energy system, and we really need to think about this as part of eco-centric industrialization, where we convert things like Denel and we support through state funding, etc., the manufacturing of renewable energy technologies. Our manufacturing base is shrinking, and we should broaden that base, create more jobs, and produce the technologies that we need. We also need eco-mobility systems. South Africa does not have integrated mass public transport systems. What we have is very fragmented, uneven, and unjust. We can push massive resources into an eco-mobility system that ensures pedestrianization, that ensures that we have train systems that are intercity, intermodal, etc. We can have bicycles on our roads and so on. This is the frontier. This is the future of the just transition. These policies, these ideas around transforming South Africa in a just way are not part of our national debate, and we want to bring them into the national debate. They are answers. They are solutions to the crises that we are living.
Dr. Vishwas Satgar, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Climate Justice Charter Movement activist there.